So I've been doing IoT for a little over 15 years now, which is longer than it's been longer than it's been called IoT. When we started doing it, we called it wireless sensor networks. And I worked on a team that released the very first IoT developer platform before there was Arduino. And so I've been doing it for a really long time. And one of the problems that's been around since I started was, how do you collect the data? Where do you collect the data? What do you do with all this data, right? And that problem has only gotten worse as more devices show up online, right? Where do you put all this time series data? And so that's really what I work on now, is where do you put all this data? And I work at InfluxData, so for the most part, I put it in InfluxData, right? The thing about IoT is that everybody talks about now if you talk to anybody about IoT, all the analysts will tell you it's about the number of devices, right? Gartner or any of these analyst firms say there will be 20 billion devices or 50 billion devices by 2025, which is great if you're a device manufacturer, right? Or it's your job to build and deploy hardware devices. But IoT is really more about the data than it is the device, right? The device is just a tool to get the data. So IoT is about instrumenting the world around us. And the only way we do that is by collecting the data from those sensors, those instruments. And so, at least for me, it's much more about the data than it is the device. Because each one of these devices that comes online is going to produce a data stream, right? As soon as you turn it on, it's going to start reporting data. And it may report a single data stream, just a temperature, or it may give you a dozen different readings. And so when you're talking about 20 billion devices, and let's say they're each giving you 10 data streams, right? Talking about 200 billion data streams. That's where the problem is, not with the device, right? It becomes the IoT data that's the real issue. So, and that's really what I call an IoT data layer, so that I have a data architecture that runs from the devices all the way back to my back-end sort of data lake, right? So I can collect and aggregate data all the way out at the edge, the first hop from the sensor. So I have a dozen sensors and they report to a data collection device that can do some aggregation, it can do some storage, some calculations, some display, and handle that local data. And then it forwards the important parts of that data to the next hop, right? And so on until I have a data lake where I can do long-term storage of all the data that I'm collecting from everywhere, right? Because from the very back end, I may not need to know the millisecond level temperature data of every temperature sensor, all 100,000 temperature sensors in my enterprise, right? I need to know what the overall health is. I need to know that all of the temperature sensors in that building are reporting in and that there are no anomalies. But I don't need to know that on a millisecond level, right? So being able to downsample that data at the edge, that relieves a lot of that bottleneck and a lot of that network overhead, because I don't have to forward that enormous amount of data all the way up and then take action on it and forward the action that needs to be taken all the way back downstream to take action, right? I can do that calculation locally. I can react to that anomaly locally, and I can have an action taken locally, and then I can just report the anomaly, right? Much lower bandwidth, much lower overhead to report the anomaly and the data around the anomaly than to just report everything and hope somebody sorts it out later someplace else. And people have talked about, in 2006 and 2007, big data was the term, right? And it was all about big data. But with IoT data, you have not seen big data yet, because the sheer amount of data from IoT is going to dwarf everything else. So the number that I typically use is IoT data to date is something around 0.4 zettabytes, all of it, right? Over the next 10 years, we will collect 7 zettabytes of data. So we've collected this much of what we will collect over the next 5 to 6 years, right? It's just going to be enormous. I love it. This is a great venue. And Marbella is gorgeous. And I've met some really good people here and heard some really interesting talks. Not just sort of language-specific talks or area-specific talks. I heard a talk from a biologist. And so that to me has been kind of unique in terms of conferences, is that it's really diverse in not just the attendees, but their fields, which allows me to sort of think outside of what I normally do and sort of get a larger perspective.